Bullies, quiet boy, hidden power. The tide turns at Berkeley High. Kellen Voss moved through Berkeley High School as if he could disappear into the walls between the lockers, a broad-shouldered presence wrapped in an oversized hoodie that never quite hid the slow roll of his weight and the careful, almost ceremonial quiet that wrapped him like a second skin. He wasn't tall, not in a dramatic way, but his frame carried gravity. A broad chest, sturdy hips, thick wrists, and a gaze that stayed politely fixed a few steps ahead of wherever a group of students happened to be scooting through the hallway. His hair was the color of coffee left too long, and it tended to lay flat against his skull unless he ran a hand through it, which didn't happen often because such small acts drew attention he preferred to avoid. He spoke rarely, his voice a soft, even rasp when he did, and his silence drew a kind of rumor, one that told others he was a walking target, even if no one could quite put a finger on why. He wore the same sweater most days, the sleeves long enough to swallow his hands, the fabric a little stretched around the middle, a visual reminder of the way the world often measured him by a number he didn't share, by a score he never chased. Berkeley High was a campus that breathed with the rhythms of a big city, its brick buildings and glass walkways threaded around a central quad where students spilled from class to class with the kind of practiced ease that made a spectator think they were born to it. The school had its quarrels and its quiet corners, its music room that echoed late after practice, its gym where chalk dust and shouted drills hung in the air like a stubborn scent, and its cafeteria where the long lines moved with a ritual precision that felt almost sacred to those who ate there daily. Kellen had lived in this world for more than a couple of years, enough to know the quirks, the unspoken codes, and the particular routes of the day. The way a hallway could feel like a trap if you walked it the wrong way, the way a lunch line could become a stage for humiliation if you misstep. He had a secret that no one at Berkeley High could see at first glance, a hidden strength tucked away behind the quiet, an old, patient discipline learned not in the crowded gym, but in the hush of a late-night private training space, a discipline of balance, leverage, and breath. He was not violent by nature. His strength lay in the ability to read another person's movement before it happened, to anchor his own body in the moment and move with a calm that looked almost unnatural for someone who carried extra weight in a world that equated heaviness with weakness. He had learned to mask that power in detachment, the way a calm surface can hide a storm beneath, to survive the daily grind with a stubborn, uncomplaining patience. The bullies did not arrive with a single loud threat so much as a pattern, a routine that crawled into Kellen's day like a creeping chill. There were three of them, a compact trio who found a certain satisfaction in the way they could lean on the hallway walls and instruct others with the casual swagger of people who had never known consequences that felt real. Their leader was a tall, lean kid named Maddox Hale, with a mouth that could twist a compliment into a jab and eyes that calculated how to turn a moment into a trophy of dominance. Maddox spoke in quick, practiced digs, a style that always sounded like he was offering something, when in fact he was trimming away others' dignity with surgical ching cuts. The other two, a couple of satellites who orbited his confidence, were named Grant Holloway and Silas Trent, each with a look of earned ease that made their sneers sting more because they didn't even have to try. They moved through the first-day rhythm as if the building itself belonged to them, and the quiet boy in the oversized hoodie was the only thing that didn't. The first real encounter occurred near the theater wing, where the smell of old costumes and dusty props clung to the air. Kellen was a beat late to English, a class he liked for the way it asked him to observe people and listen more than he spoke. The bell's last ring felt like a distant storm as he hurried along the hallway, shoulders tucked in, eyes lowered. Maddox's crew had decided this was the moment to rehearse their routine, a choreography of small humiliations meant to draw attention to the quiet boy. They cornered him by the trophy case, the glass catching the light and turning it into 1,000 sharp little spears aimed at his feet. A snide laugh slid through the corridor like a blade, and Maddox's voice rose, a cadence that made onlookers tilt their heads, trying to catch the exact syllable that would reveal the joke. Kellen felt the heat rise in his cheeks, a flush that traveled from collarbone to cheekbone, and he did what he did with the same steady, non-reactive response he'd practiced for years. Nothing. He offered a small nod, a soft smile that looked more like surrender, and he stepped away, letting the stream of students swallow the moment and push the ritual along. The humiliation wasn't shown in grandeur, but in the quiet arithmetic of a public moment, the laughter that echoed off the walls, the way the eyes that watched dared him to react, the way the space he had to navigate seemed to shrink a little more with every step. That pattern grew more pronounced as days passed. In the cafeteria, they found him again, a table far from the bustle of the main line, but not far enough to escape the reach of their attention. The tray would tilt, or a cup would topple, and the harmless comedy of a fallen lunch became a stage for a chorus of smirks and soft, mocking notes. In the gym, they pressed the variable of fear into their game, cornering him at the weight rack or near the door, where the echo of sneakers against the hardwood could carry a crowd. The more they expected him to crumble, the more he kept his silence. His response, a practiced stillness that looked almost like contemplation. He would breathe slowly, count to 5 in his head, and re-center himself, until the world stopped needing his words to feel the truth of his presence. It wasn't bravery, in the sense of loud defiance. It was a stubborn gravity that refused to be drawn into the circle of their taunts, a decision to convert pain into a quiet steadiness. Ari Brooks watched from the periphery, a photographer with a quick eye and a slower, truer heart. She wore headphones around her neck and carried a camera that looked too precious for a hallway to chew up, a silent rebellion against the school's expectations that she might be less than what she claimed. Ari found in Kellen a different kind of quiet, one that wasn't about hiding, but about keeping something safe, a stubborn dignity. She wasn't naive about the way the bullies moved through the school with a confidence that seemed to justify their actions, but she did see something there in him that the rest of them did not. A patient resolve that wasn't about power or performance. It was about keeping his humanity intact while the world tested his resolve. When the trio cornered him near the art hall after a late practice, Ari instinctively stepped aside the doorframe with her camera in hand and a look that said she was not blind to what was happening, not ignorant of the cost. The moment was small, a single body language misread or misreadable by trained eyes, but to Ari it was something else, a sign that Kellen's quietness was not weakness, but a shield that had never needed to break to prove its strength. Ari's admiration grew in tandem with the escalating pattern of the bullying, and she found herself drawn to the mathematics of Kellen's restraint. She attempted to speak to him in the hall after a particularly public incident, one where a spilled drink had splashed onto his shoes, drawing a chorus of oohs and humored groans, as if the stain on the floor were a personal indictment. She offered him the napkin she had tucked away in her bag, the simple kindness of a spontaneous gesture that carried with it no expectation beyond a shared fraction of the school's daily pain. Her body language spoke her courage, the way she angled her camera toward the action and kept her gaze centered on him as if to say, in a language the crowd wouldn't hear, "You're not invisible." She was the only student who ever asked him a direct question that wasn't a test of his nerves, a rare moment of human curiosity that didn't flirt with spectacle. The teachers watched, of course. Mr. Lang stood at the edge of the gym corridor during practice one afternoon, a chalk-white line of disapproval on his face as he counted the boys' laps and offered a few words that sounded like a rebuke without naming names. He didn't intervene when the trio sassed Kellen, nor did he offer a protective shield to Ari or any bystander. The adults moved through Berkeley High as if the building itself held an ancient protocol. Eyes forward, hands busy, say nothing that could destabilize the fragile social order. The turning point came at the worst possible moment, during a Friday pep assembly, a ritual that could have been a triumph for the school and a spectacle of school spirit, had it not served as the exact stage where Kellen's life would pivot irrevocably. The assembly took place in the gym, the bleachers a living sea of students who cheered and who wore the visible markers of their loyalties. The Bullies saw an opportunity to crown their latest display, a planned humiliation of Kellen in front of the whole school, a moment they believed would define his existence in their terms, a moment to assert their own superiority by breaking him open in front of the crowd. They had planned a mock challenge, baiting him to respond to a provocation the way the crowd expected, a challenge to fight, to show courage in a way that would give them scandalous material for days to come. Kellen felt the weight of hundreds of eyes turned toward him, and he felt the old instinct tug at him, the urge to vanish, to become nothing at all. But he was not alone. Ari stood at the edge of the floor, her camera still hanging from her neck, her whole body tense with a different kind of risk, the risk of telling the truth with a fragment of light and a single frame when the world around her demanded spectacle. The Bullies began, their leader stepping into a stage pose, a half smirk on his lips and a cheer that traveled through the gym like a flame. They shot their glances around, daring Kellen to respond, to make a move that would justify their theater. And then something shifted in Kellen in that single breath-held moment. It wasn't a roar or a shout, not a flinch or a retreat. It was a patient, measured exhale that carried his courage forward, a quiet transformation that didn't require loudness to prove itself. He stepped off the floor's edge, turning his body toward the trio with a deliberate stillness that unsettled the room. The first contact wasn't a punch or a kick. It was a controlled demonstration of balance, a small pivot of his hips, a micro shift of weight that redirected an opponent's forward surge into a moment of loss for the aggressor. The crowd gasped at the precision, the way his body moved, as if it remembered 100 patterns of training practiced in unseen rooms. What followed was a sequence that felt like a stylized, real-life choreography. Kellen's hidden prowess surfaced in a way that did not scream violence, but spoke of a trained mindfulness, a grappling hold applied with minimal contact, a pin that forced the bully to yield without throwing him to the ground, a moment of restraint that made the onlookers realize the skill was not about domination, but about safety and control. He used leverage and momentum, not brute strength, guiding his attacker to a safe position against the nearest wall, where the bully's own weight and panic prevented any further cunning. The other two hesitated, their bravado faltering as Ari's camera captured their silent horror. The realization that this was not the quiet boy's end, but the quiet boy's beginning. The bystanders paused, the noise of the gym dissolving into a focused hush, and then a chorus of whispers rose, a mix of disbelief and awe. Maddox's proud mask cracked for a split second, and for that moment he looked almost startled to find he had misread the room. The moment did not end with a punch or a forceful shove. It ended with a controlled, almost ceremonial hold that demonstrated the true nature of Kellen's strength. It was a discipline of control and mercy, a restraint that kept the aggressor from harm while stripping him of the illusion that he could break someone without consequence. In the same instant, Ari stepped forward, lifting her camera as if to show the world the truth. The person who appeared to be weak was moving with a precision and care that the crowd could not deny. The resulting silence was not empty. It was heavy with the recognition that the school's dynamics would never look the same again. The bullies found themselves unglued in a way that did not require a louder voice to reveal their exposure. The crowd's reactions ranged from stunned awe to a kind of concerned praise, as though they watched a careful, dangerous moment unfold and did not know whether to cheer or to avert their eyes. The aftermath was slower to arrive, but inevitable. People who had once whispered about Kellen now began to see him in a new light. Teachers who had stood by during the earlier episodes looked at him with a measure of respect that betrayed their guilt for not acting earlier. And some students who had joined in the laughter found themselves asking how they could have misunderstood him for so long. Ari, whose admiration had already formed a quiet, steadfast bond with him, was among the first to approach him after the assembly, her camera already lowered as though she did not want to frame him for fear of turning him into a spectacle again. She told him, with a soft, certain voice that only true friends can summon, that his strength wasn't loud, but it was real, that his restraint displayed a level of courage that true heroes often forget to claim for themselves. The two shared a look that said more than any words could, something stubborn and stubbornly hopeful that promised future trust, a shared effort to navigate the new reality together. The locus of the change wasn't only in Kellen's body but in the way his mind began to work with his body, how his posture altered from the bend of a man trying to shrink into his clothes to the quiet power of someone who walked with intention. A teacher, Mr. Lang, shifted more than a little in the weeks after the assembly. His eyes followed Kellen where he used to ignore him, and there was a grudging respect in his voice when he announced a small private mentorship, an offer to share a gym space after hours if Kellen wished to explore training as a discipline rather than a pastime. And so Kellen began to train again, not to win any more public battles, but to master a craft that could keep him safe, should danger return. The training was not grandiose. It was deliberate, patient work that built strength without requiring him to become what the bullies believed him to be, someone who sought power for its own sake. Ari's companionship through the hours of practice gave him a trust he hadn't allowed himself before, the sense that his progress was not a solitary ascent, but a shared project in which two people could grow stronger because they believed in each other. The school's atmosphere shifted in the weeks that followed. The laughter that had once traveled the hallway like a contagious disease slowed to a mere murmur, and the faces that had once contorted at the sight of him began to soften in the corners of the corridors, where they once appeared to be perched, ready to judge. The bullies themselves, particularly Maddox, began to show signs of strain. Short temper in the cafeteria, a quick glare when a teacher passed by, a tendency to hover by the stage exit rather than roam in the open. There were moments when Maddox tried to reassert himself through snappy retorts or the subtle, familiar insinuations that had worked before, but those attempts were now met with an almost clinical calm from Kellen, a response that conveyed not anger but a firm boundary. The line between endurance and exploitation had become something that Kellen would not cross again. The other students started to realize how their apathy had helped create a climate that allowed cruelty to flourish. Conversations that had once included laughter at his expense now turned to questions about what changed and whether anyone could be trusted to stand up for what was right. A few students even reached out to Ari to express their concern, telling her they wished they had spoken up sooner, that their own complicity had made the environment seem more normal than it should have been. Some of them pledged to do better, to challenge the casual cruelty that had once seemed so trivial and invisible. Kellen's own internal transformation matured in small, unglamorous ways as well. A posture that rose with quiet confidence, a slow, deliberate sense of movement that didn't invite a fight but implied that he would finish one if necessary, and a voice that grew a touch firmer but remained soft enough to be a private oath rather than a public roar. He began to notice the little kindnesses that had always existed in the school. Students who offered their help if his bag got heavy, a janitor who would smile and remind him to breathe when a panic rose in his chest after a class change, a coach who gave him a nod and a brief word of encouragement as if to say, "You belong here as much as anyone else." Ari remained a steady beacon in those days, her presence a reminder of what he fought for beyond his own relief. A new sense of belonging for her as well, a feeling that her own story mattered to him as much as his own. Ultimately, the confrontation did not erase the past, nor erase the pain of previous days. It reframed what had happened and turned it into a trajectory toward justice. Justice that did not rely on humiliation or fear, but on the quiet, persistent demonstration of what one person could do when their heart refused to accept the world as it was. Maddox did not come back with a triumphant smile or a reassertion of his power. He appeared chastened, not broken, with a hardened awareness that his old ways could no longer protect him from the consequences of harming others. He apologized, not with a dramatic declaration, but with something closer to a human truth he had avoided for too long. That power without accountability is a lie. The apology was imperfect and hesitant, but it carried a weight that no perfect redemption could have matched. A confession that his behavior had hurt another human being, and that the burden of making amends would rest with him from that day forward. It was not forgiveness guaranteed or demanded. It was earned through time, through a slower, more honest engagement with the consequences of his actions. In the resolution, Berkeley High began to measure its own norms with more care. The climate of fear diminished, replaced by a cautious optimism in the freshmen and a renewed sense of accountability in the upperclassmen. The new respect for Kellen did not exist as a trophy to be displayed. It existed as something more intimate, a trust that the people around him would respond to cruelty with a refusal to remain silent, that they would stand up for each other in a way that honored restraint as a form of strength rather than as weakness. The bystanders who had done nothing learned to recognize their own complicity in the harm and chose to become observers who spoke up when something crossed a line, and who reminded the school of the moral obligation we all carry to protect others, even if standing up makes us targets ourselves. For Kellen, the personal payoff was not the banner of victory, but a new fidelity to himself. He no longer moved through life with the aim of avoiding attention. Rather, he moved with a measured sense of worth, his steps more confident, his breath steadier, his gaze more open to the people around him. He found a balance between strength and mercy that did not demand he become a different person, but allowed him to become a more complete version of the same. He and Ari built a quiet companionship that did not demand spectacle, but offered a sense of safety and honesty in a world that often rewarded the opposite. He spoke a little more, and when he did, it was with a careful candor that invited trust rather than fear, a small but clear signal that a life could be powerful and gentle at the same time. And the moral of the story, which settled into the school's collective memory like a seed beneath mulch, was clear. Resilience is not the ability to crush others underfoot, but the capacity to rise with integrity when one's dignity is threatened. Standing up for yourself does not require becoming what you hate. It requires choosing a path that honors the humanity in everyone involved, including yourself. The underdog who used his hidden strength without letting it define him became a person others could respect. A reminder that justice can be earned with restraint and courage, that a single quiet act of courage can ripple outward like a careful breath that saves more than one person. As the school year wore on, Kellen walked the halls with Ari by his side, a pair the crowd began to recognize not for their night-and-day difference, but for how they carried the truth of what they had learned. That resilience is a steadfast choice, not a final triumph, and that standing up for yourself can change everything without turning you into the thing you abhor.